Hello, everybody, and welcome to another session of BA Insights. And I'm really pleased to have two excellent guests with me again. And today we're going to be talking about cross-functional thinking. Okay. Before I introduce my guest and before we get into the topic, just a reminder for any of you that haven't already, drop your likes, drop your subscribe, and your any alerts or notification bells. As I understand, it really does help. All right. And likewise, if you've got any suggestions for any topics in the future for BA Insights or would like to be a guest, please drop a note in the comments. All right. But other than that, let's move on and do some introductions. So, Chinmay, if I could start with yourself, please.
Sure. So I've been associated as a business analyst for various industries since about 11, 12 years. I started my career with TCS for the first 6 to 7 years before moving to Canada. And now, as of now, I am working as an independent consultant for the government of New Brunswick. So that's all of my experience. I'm a CBAP. I also run a Business Analysis Training Institute, BA Buddy. This is kind of an advertisement for that. So
Feel free.
that's all. That's all from me.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Chinmay. And Roger.
Hi, I'm Roger Burlton. I'm president of an organization called Process Renewal Group. We've been around for over 30 years now. Actually, we're hitting our 30th anniversary this year. And we do business process consulting work. But for the last 15 of those 30 years, we've been heavily engaged in business architecture. The idea that there's a lot of dots that need to be connected. And so we try to connect them up. I run a couple of conferences, global conferences each year, and I've written a couple of books, but my passion is helping people get better themselves at doing this kind of work.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Roger. And I can attest to your book. I just happen to have it here. I did go and get it from the bookshelf earlier on, but I remember, I think it might be one of your sessions, Roger. I don't know when it was a while ago, but you spoke about collecting, connecting and correcting the dots, which is part of your opening on your book. I think that's what enticed me to have a look at it. So it's a pleasure to meet you, as it is a pleasure to meet Chinmay as well. All right. But let's get into the topic. So let's start with what is cross-functional thinking? And I wonder, Chinmay, can I start with you on that question, please?
Sure. I thought about it. I think if I have to define cross-functional thinking, it's the opposite of tunnel vision. So, the way you assess impacts or the way you look at things, the way you understand things and not just look at your part of the work, but also understand what others are doing and how it could impact others. This is how I would, define cross-functional thinking, not just looking at what you are doing, but branching out to understand how it is going to impact the others and making sure that your solution or the part that you're working on considers all that factors before you deliver something or before you present it to the others so that risks can be mitigated at a early stage rather than waiting for the end. So that's how I would define cross-functional thinking.
Excellent. Thank you, Chinmay. Roger.
Yeah, most of my work is done at the across the whole organization. So my thinking always starts with outside in thinking, which I think is very consistent with cross-functional thinking, because the customers who receive our services from the outside of the organization, they couldn't care less about our functions. They couldn't care less about our HR, our IT, our risk departments, our various organizational units. They only care about, are they getting the value that they expected to when they signed up to do something or buy something from us. And so, however, I think that within the organization, we tend to manage all the bits and pieces, but there's no guarantee they connect together in order to create value for the recipients of what we do. So to me, cross-functional thinking is a matter of aligning all the things we do where we have various specializations in the organization so that they contribute towards the value that's required on the outside work. So cross-functional thinking to me is very much how do we get all those pieces working together to optimize it for the recipient, not for the performer.
Yeah, and that builds on that sort of big picture that Chinmay was talking about as well, I think. And to me, Roger, as well, I mean, I often end up thinking about things from an end-to-end perspective or a front-to-back perspective, we call it as well, which feels like that's a natural way to maybe branch out of the small area that I might start in, and then to start thinking about cross-functionally, how do the different teams engage? How does information, as an example, transverse itself across those functions? And really, it's stepping outside of that tunnel, as you mentioned, Chinmay, to that wider view, whether that's inside and out or out and in, I guess, as Roger alluded to a minute ago. With that in mind, I mean, so with an understanding of what cross-functional thinking is, I wonder, Roger, could you explain to me what the importance of cross-functional thinking is, or the benefits, if you want to think of it that way?
Well, to me, the benefit is that we're all in organizations which are trying to serve some purpose. And the purpose is not for ourselves. We're a means to an end. So the question is, what is the end? And how can we line up all the various means that we have to put in place so that we succeed as an organization? The challenge I find is that each part of the organization measures its executives on some functional measurement, which, when you put them all together, might be sub-optimizing what's important for the cross-functional measure. What is the outcome, as opposed to what are the means to the end? If we optimize our means for our own purposes and not for the ends, then I think we're missing something. So to me, the advantage is we perform better as an organization. And as I said before, our customers couldn't care less about all those various things that we're sub-optimizing internally.
Yeah, absolutely. Chinmay?
Sorry, John, I forgot the question.
The question was actually how important, why is it important, or how important is cross-functional thinking? Or to think of it a different way, what are the benefits of that cross-functional thinking?
Right. Like, continuing to what Roger just mentioned, the client or the user does not care how you've achieved something. It's more from our perspective. We know that there will be mistakes made. The client doesn't care about it. The client needs 100%, at least a workable product. But for us, we know that there will be mistakes made. I think it's important where we reduce the number of mistakes, and it's only possible when we, like I said, take all the perspectives in mind, and then we move towards what we want to achieve. It will never be, I don't think, in my experience, again, you guys can, differ, but there's no way that everybody achieves 100% of what they set out to. But at least reducing that gap between what 100% means and what we deliver, I think you can achieve a lot when you have cross-functional thinking as a culture within the organization or within the project. If you have that culture, if you have that perspective that everybody has to think on those lines, I think that gap between 100% and what you deliver can be reduced as much as possible. And that's why cross-functional thinking takes a front seat when you are looking at things from this perspective.
If I can just add a bit to that, I think that what we see in all the architecture and process work that we're doing is that the world is going towards not caring about what you do internally. But so if you take, I have several clients who are delivering product to Walmart, for example. And with Walmart, if you don't have perfect order, which is on time, like 100% delivery on time, build according to the right agreed numbers and so on, like everything is just perfect. If it's not perfect, they will automatically deduct from your invoice a penalty. And so not only are you not working together cross-functionally, but if you don't, it costs you money with your client. So in other words, it's expensive for the organization for you to not have cross-functional thinking. So think about the consequences of not having cross-functional thinking and not having cross-functional performance.
Something like that, Roger, certainly focuses the mind, because I think for a lot of organizations or individuals where we're not doing cross-functional thinking, I think, the disadvantage of that is, that lack of efficiency, that lack of ability to look for synergies across the organization and what you're doing. But then adding that last level, that actual financial penalty to not doing so, really does focus the mind. And perhaps actually for other organizations outside of Walmart, taking that example,
Yeah.
the penalty is not as explicit, but it's as impactful, such as customers walking away because they haven't received the service that they expect on time. At least with Walmart, they've been open enough in this example to tell you what their expectations are before walking away, given that control. It makes me think as well, what both of you have been saying is about, cross-functional thinking has quite a lot of parallels to BAs thinking about their role in change. In that, a BA being successful in their analysis doesn't really mean too much unless the rest of the implementation and the change team are also part of that chain of events that leads to a successful outcome as well. So maybe BAs who are not used to cross-functional thinking, perhaps they can start with joining up their efforts from a BA perspective with their project managers, their product owners, their development teams, etc., and use that as a practice ground before they start to, explore beyond their own process, their own team, and their own areas as well. And that was something I didn't write down beforehand. It was definitely something inspired by what you were both saying. So thank you for that. I wonder then, moving on to a slightly different question in terms of, what skills do you believe are essential for a business analyst to excel in a cross-functional environment? And Chinmay, I'll start with you on that very easy question.
Oh yeah, I think it's an open-ended question. What I feel is inherently the definition of business analysis encapsulates cross-functional thinking, because working in a silo as a business analyst, you can only deliver so much. But when you think from everybody's perspective, it could be as simple as thinking from the project manager's perspective, or how would the product owner think about this or approach this, or how the development team would approach this. What information would they want to proceed ahead with this development or testing, or even from the business's perspective, how would the business perceive this change, or what does the business want to achieve when they are thinking about this? What's the basis of this whole change, of this whole exercise? If you think about it, it will reflect in your deliverables. And at the same time, like I said before, the number of errors that you get, the testing will be smoother. When you train the end customers, you'll come up with answers to the questions rather than just saying, let me take it back and I'll look at it and then I can answer it. The impression that you portray when you have the answer, the right answer, and the most logical answer right there with on your fingertips, the users know that this guy knows what he's doing and he has put in his efforts in this whole exercise so that this whole transition gets smoothened. So I think that's what I would say. As a business analyst, it is inherent that you think cross-functionally, and that's in the definition of being a business analyst.
And the point you made there as well about putting yourself perhaps in the shoes of your other stakeholders, showing that empathy as you collaborate as well. Maybe that's a fairly simple first step to people learning how to apply some cross-functional thinking in a very, very straightforward manner.
I agree.
Yeah, I think there's some very personal human types of things going on here as well. My experience, all the business analysts that I've really respected over the years, they know in their gut, if you wish, when something doesn't seem right that they're working on. That they're working. They know when it's a part of the problem and not the whole problem. And they also know when, even if they fix this, it's not going to work because there's something else going on. And they're comfortable with that discomfort. but they challenge. They challenge the boundaries. They challenge the scope. They almost become a pain in a nice way, I suppose, to everybody else around them when they start to question, does this make sense? Have we considered this other issue over here? Have we checked with these other people to see if this is actually going to work? And that, that ability to be curious, persistent, but have a little bit of a thick skin because you're going to get pushback because it wasn't your scope in the first place. But I think it's like I think it actually becomes an emotional response before it becomes an intellectual response. Something's not right, but you're not sure what it is yet. But you start to probe and check into things that maybe you weren't asked to do in the first place. And so I think you got to be okay with that when not everybody loves what you're asking about.
Maybe that points to, Roger, the fact that that there's skills, and there's also maybe more of these emotional or personal behavioural competencies. You mentioned also
I agree.
Curiosity. You're talking I'm hearing like the emotional intelligence that BAs develop over time as well, which are always skills that are beneficial. To be able to challenge, as you said, be a pain in a constructive way, and to look at the big picture as well. And maybe I might stick to that similar theme of competencies, and I think add to those that you've both provided, and think about the BA's ability to think critically. Obviously, their organisational skills can help. Their communication, and I think there's an element as well of creativity and thinking about how they can go outside of a conceptual box, as it were, and look at what other areas of the organisation and other functions that they can bring together as well.
I do think what's important too is you have to read your audience. You have to understand who it is you're going to have to talk to about this and what is their style. And even things like, if I bring this up, will I get fired? Is not a good thing to have to face.
That's it.
Yeah, I think it also becomes a kind of an ego clash when you start taking it personally, even though you know that you're right, or sometimes, like Roger mentioned, you are a pain. You can't take it to the extent that it becomes an ego clash with the others. You need to know when to stop. You can push once if the pushback is harder than expected. I think that's where you stop. Maybe you can mention it somewhere in the document, hidden somewhere, that you did mention, but it was met with a resistance. That way, you're not in the line of fire. But like Roger mentioned, but beyond a point, I think a good BA should also know when to stop and to take a step back and watch the fun if it unfolds the way you think it would. And that's when people would start taking you seriously. That, all right, this guy had warned me, but I didn't listen to him. Maybe next time I'll try listening to him, and maybe we'll go in a different direction.
I think also there's a good person skill there is later on, if it falls apart, you can't go in and say, I told you that. It's going to happen.
That would be
That's
bad.
not good for your career.
Not at all. And I mean, it's just then really, I guess it's that that intelligence, as we said, can really play the part here to think about how to approach this situation. But I think as well, like the other BA skills that we all use in a generally day to day, be it around process and organisation and linking things together, traceability, etc. All of that adds to both our own insight before we go into these conversations. But I think that credibility, and it helps maybe some of the stakeholders that we work with, gives them the ability to see perhaps cross-functionally when they wouldn't have otherwise had that view, and they might be having that narrow view. Because quite often it's us doing that as the BAs, because we're speaking to a number of different stakeholders and collating a collective view. And actually, it's on us to share the data, I think, in that situation, to maybe say that all but one of our stakeholders have an opinion in one direction. Maybe that's because the overwhelming majority in that example are probably right, or the data is right. But as you say, we don't make decisions. We just keep people up to post and make the right ones.
I think that's a really good point. Like as a BA, you can't just come in and say, this doesn't seem to connect up to the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Doesn't seem right to me, and I think we should change our scope. You got to go in with evidence. You got to go in with showing that if we don't do this, then we have risk associated with it. And what are the outcomes, and are we prepared to accept those risks? And just at least the BA can't make the call, but the BA has to sort of be informative and credible in that discussion. So you need something to back you up.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of another question. I mean, it's connected, of course, but around, are there any tools or frameworks, and I'll put this one to you, Roger, that you find useful when fostering that cross-functional collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the place I always start is who are the stakeholders at the end of the day? Like, and I say stakeholder, not just internal stakeholder, but starting with the external stakeholders. Who are your customers? Do you have regulatory controls that you cannot go through, even if it made it better for the customer? Like, who are these various stakeholders? And start with that and then work backwards and say, what are the products and services we're offering? What information do we exchange? What processes do we conduct? Because those processes might be executed by different functional departments across. And I always start with that and work backwards so that when I start to argue for more cross-functional work, it's because there's an outcome that the corporation or the organization has agreed is important. So I can always relate to the why and what are the consequences if we don't go along with it. So I find uh, high-level process maps are useful, but that original stakeholder analysis, working backwards from them back into what do we do, I find is a good, really, really good technique because then we keep everybody focused on why we're doing this in the first place. And if I do have to have a discussion, it's not just my opinion. It's actually here I'm showing you that if we don't connect these two things together, we're not going to get the results we want. And I can show some evidence of that.
Yeah, and that also supports that last point we were just talking about, Roger, in terms of not having the BA decide on an action, but the BA to be able to say, here are the stakeholders I've engaged with. These are the stakeholders that have contributed to a recommendation, and actually that's all comes back to who were our stakeholders, what's our list of stakeholders, and why have we interacted with a stakeholder.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that point, Roger. Thank you. Chinmay, what would be your opinion on tools or frameworks that you might find useful?
I think with after COVID, I think it has become even more important since or rather, I or many people have stopped, going to offices and working from home. But I think one of the tools that comes to my mind is, the workshops that we have. It could be at any stage of the project. I think workshop is one of the better techniques or tools that really uh, help keep people focused on, everybody is focusing on one area before they move on to the next one. So I think workshops could be a really good tool. It not only leads to good collaboration, but cross-functionally, you get to understand somebody's area of expertise or area of work in a much better way, and that leads to you improving the processes you're developing or any change that you're making. That gives you a perspective, and then you can go back, change the way you were thinking, uh, update your thought process, update your knowledge, and then utilize it to get to the next stage. I think a workshop comes to my mind. Then there's interviews. I know most likely it's a one-to-one. Many a times it's one-to-one, but still you get that perspective of somebody else's how they are thinking. Like Roger mentioned, what processes would they like to see in this whole bit? I can think of an example. I was working for ABB UK in an SAP project in the customer service module. So for us, creating a cost center or creating a service order that had a cost center associated was a non-event. It was just a placeholder for us. I knew later on I did find out how important a cost center is. But for me, thinking about a cost center was a non-event. But when I took, talked to people from the finance department or from project management or even production planning, it was only then that I understand that cost center is one of the most important uh, entities within the SAP framework. And then that changed my perspective entirely because that cost center did not just impact these areas. It impacted the reports that they were consuming. It impacted the way the whole sales and service and production and material management process, changed or worked, and it revolved around the cost centers. So I think when you take different perspectives, so coming back to the question, I think workshops, interviews are one of the best techniques to improve your cross-functional thinking. And the tools, I think, like I said, started my point with remote work. I think all these tools that are there, Zoom, there's Teams, there's so many others. I think these are very good tools that foster collaborative thinking.
Chinmay has brought up a really, really good point, and it triggers something in my mind, experience I had, very similar. And I remember being in a workshop one time, and we were trying to solve this particular problem. And so we were going around the room with the different people together, who many of whom don't usually talk to each other. Um, we were talking about some particular product, and the salespeople saying it's working so well. We're getting record sales. We've never had it this good. By the way, salespeople were being measured on volume of sales. So their perspective was, yes, we're selling more, so it's great. But in the same room, we had the customer service people saying, it's awful. All of our customers are calling us up. They hate it. They were sold the wrong product. They never should have had that in the first place. And they're saying they're never going to buy from us ever again.
Yeah,
But that would not have come out unless these people were sort of in the same room. But then our point was, well, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah, and that workshop, as you mentioned, maybe for some is the first time that the penny drops and they can appreciate that they're not the only link in the chain and that they're part of a bigger process and that there are things dependent on them. There's outcomes, and it all links up into a big picture. And maybe actually sometimes by putting a face to some of these different processes, it can make us and make the people in the room a little bit more able and willing to take more responsibility for it when it's perhaps something like a faceless team or a faceless process. Maybe it's easier to ignore, I would say. So yeah, definitely like both of those points. I mean, I think on top of what we've both mentioned, I think for me, like tools and frameworks, I tend to think around process. I think any tool that relates into process that can almost illuminate the environment and the organization is useful. I think enterprise process, if your organization has it, coupled with like BPMN or something similar, so that we can start to understand a little bit more granular detail of the processes and possibly even understand where there's similarities in process. That can be helpful. I think even lifting it even a higher level again, I think business architecture is quite often a good way, as well as taking that more cross-organizational view and thinking about what it is ultimately as an organization you're delivering to your clients and your services, which can maybe focus the mind on all those individual teams that are looking at different parts of a end-to-end process.
I think I'd like to add here.
Yeah, sure.
I think the pre-UAT testing that you do, I think it should be witnessed across the board. The reason being that is one way you can look at the entire process, how it works, where it impacts. It could be as it need not be very comprehensive, but when I look at how things work one bit by the other, I get a perspective, like I said, of how others have impacted this change. And that, again, acts as a collaborative, as a platform for me to think collaboratively. Okay, something went wrong here because maybe I did not configure it somewhere. and that has impacted the entire chain. And I think this could be another tool that people can use. Maybe it's not applicable for everyone, but wherever possible, I think if everybody witnesses at least how the value chain works from one end to the other,
Mhm.
it will enhance collaboration amongst everyone in the team.
Now, as we're discussing this, this stimulates other thinking that taking place here. Again, one of the first things we will do with whether it's a whole architecture for a whole organization or whether it's a specific initiative, um, we always gain agreement based upon the stakeholder needs and expectations. We always come up with what we call a North Star. And so we say, okay, let's have 5 outcomes, 5 things that we will say when we're finished, if we've achieved these 5, then we know we've been successful. And then in every workshop, every session, the first thing we bring up is we put the North Star up and say, remember, this is our outcome. And it forces us to sort of step back a bit from some of the things which personally we might like better, but it's not going to be as good for the outcome as if we back off a little bit. So we just keep reminding people of why. What are we really trying to do here? And if we can get agreement, and if we can sort of put performance indicators on those, then that's even better. So, okay, you have an idea here. How is that going to contribute towards what we all agreed at the beginning was this set of outcomes? Keeps everybody focused.
Yeah, to that point, Roger, I suppose it makes us think about appropriate measures that are not too granular and they only really look at teams and minor deliverables, but actually focus on metrics that are really key to the outcome and key to the client that we're servicing as well.
Absolutely.
I really like that point. I wonder, I mean, we've sort of been talking, we've been touching on a few sort of common challenges as we've been talking, but I wonder, are there any sort of common challenges additional perhaps that we haven't spoken about that you might want to throw into the mix in terms of common challenges around cross-functional thinking? So think of it as maybe blockers or impediments to cross-functional thinking. I wonder, Chinmay, could I ask you that question to you first?
I can think of something that Roger mentioned when you get too overboard. So you think beyond something which is beyond the scope of the change, or something you're kind of splitting hair. There are risks, but those are not too big. So those are avoidable risks, but you are fixated on it. I think that could be really, and especially when others who are expert in their area, if they are saying, "Oh, we can live with this, let's move ahead." I think if you get fixated on it, I think that can be an impediment. Even though you're right when you're thinking cross-functionally, but it has to be reasonable. So I think being unreasonable when you're thinking cross-functionally could be an impediment for everyone.
Yeah, so I wonder if an example of that is like when it comes to, I think of like business analysis standards as an example, right? There'll be very strict standards potentially, or even guidelines around templates that we can use. But sometimes as we start to engage people from different functions and different parts of the organisation, we might realise that we have to flex a little bit with our templates, our way of working, or even our own mindset. And I think, that's something to consider in that, relating to your point, Chinmay.
Sure. Yeah, I think that for me, one of the things that we always worry about is it going to stick? In other words, you can go through all this. Will it stick with the people who are going to have to live with it after we as analysts are on to the next initiative? Right? In other words, we're not living with the solution. They are living with the solution. And so I think this issues of, well, why do I need to change? We've always done it this way and it's always been good and we've never had a problem before. And so why are we changing all of this? And that can be 2 things. It can be explicit rejection, or it can be implicit and very subtle, and things don't work because generally people find a way to sort of sort of not go with it. So I think the cultural aspect is a really, really interesting one. Like I have a client who said to me, he said, Roger, remember like a number of years ago, we did this warehousing project. We said, yeah, we changed how we built some as is models. We get everybody together in workshops and we came up with new ways of doing it. So we went from as is to 2B. We implemented it. It was all great. So yeah, but the problem was there was no sort of nobody paid attention to how it was being rolled out on a continuing basis. So we looked at it again. We discovered we went from as is to 2B, and now we have the as was model because culturally people had gradually undone it back to the way they like to do it because there was no sort of sustainment plan in place and no plan sort of to deal with people's fear and concerns about implementation. So sometimes I think it's not just the design, it's the implementation that goes along with it as well.
I mean, I'd like to add, like Roger said, you can't overcomplicate something, or sometimes simplification doesn't work either. You have to maintain a balance between, like Roger said, what you are, proposing versus what is implementable. I think as a BA especially, and again, when you think cross-functionally, you kind of get an idea how to keep it balanced when you know all the perspectives. I think that's where it helps. And then the solution that you propose, when you consider all the perspectives, is a balanced one. Like Roger mentioned, people are always resistant to change. Uh, you know that at the back of your mind. But when you're proposing a solution, uh, it can't take them way beyond their comfort zone.
Mhm.
When it's a reasonable change, people may accept it. Maybe they'll take a couple of days to adjust to it, but at least they'll accept it and move on rather than getting something very shiny and people just rejecting it, saying this is beyond our capacity, and this is we things are going to go the way they have been always. So I think
And
that the balance has to be there.
sometimes that is quite rational. In other words, we're designing something which they've never done before. They're afraid they don't know how to do it. There's a big new shiny system that's going to come in. They're really afraid about that. Um, and other times it's just, they don't want to. They don't want to change. It's just hard for them to do it. So we can't we can't ignore that implementation. The change management is a critical part. So in other words, as BAs, we tend to think about design, but I think we got to start thinking a bit more about implementation.
Yeah, I
Right.
would being pragmatic as well about the end, who the users
Yeah, for sure.
impacted. And sometimes, I mean, I'm certainly very familiar with an example very recently, actually, where the right thing for the organisation is to adopt a certain level of standards. And I don't think there's many people that don't want to do it. But if you're somebody who's already maxed out a capacity, you're only person in the team, your ability to move as fast as the organisation wants you to might be limited. And perhaps that doesn't mean they shouldn't move forward. Perhaps what it means is that as a BA, you need to shed some light on that situation, suggest some options for maybe bringing in some temporary support in that case to help that individual. And maybe the best person to ask is the individual themselves as to how they might overcome the challenges that they see.
So I think what we're doing is we're now talking about getting beyond cross-functional thinking. We're getting into cross-functional performance. And
yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
That reminds me, back in 2021, I guess, I was working for a power utility company. They were trying to move from their manual process to fill out forms to a mobile-based form where everything will be automated. I was doing a vendor assessment. I remember there was one vendor who had the shiniest products, most economical, most feature rich products, but I had to reject it just for the fact that it was not easy to use. So I had to recommend an inferior vendor just because it simply wasn't practical to go with that option. So like Roger said, we have to think from all the perspectives before we recommend something, because people and organizations are dependent on our recommendations or our solutions. And we, even though no matter how much you like or how much, if something impresses you, practically it has to be implementable. And I'm glad that I recommended that vendor, because it was about 2,000 engineers would use that
Mm,
product. And
mhm,
even if half of them rejected it, the whole exercise would have been,
mhm.
worthless. So it was quite an experience.
I wonder
Yeah,
just,
so it becomes incredibly difficult when we're put in a position where somebody has already selected the software, and now we have to go figure out how to make it work and implement it. And you know already up front you're going to be facing these problems.
Yeah.
yeah, an all too familiar scenario, I'm afraid, on that one. Maybe we don't have enough hours to solve that one. I wonder, just to close the session, I wonder, Roger, is there any further advice that you might give, be it to business analysts or more broadly, on how they can sort of embrace cross-functional thinking or adopt some of the things we've been talking
I think Chinmay has already brought this up, and it's the issue that um, sometimes you might be aware enough or insightful enough to know that if you think cross-functionally and design cross-functionally, it's going to be um, in an ideal world, it's going to be a better solution. But there are constraints on what you're able to get away with. And so I think it's like this idea we call it sort of freedom within a framework. And so, in other words, your framework might give you constraints, but then you have the freedom to get all this cross-functional thinking working, but without over-promising what might be possible, because you just don't have the option of going with what might be perfect for you. I think because I'm trying to say is be realistic with it.
yeah. Yeah, and I guess in a bigger organisation, different parts of the organisation is changing all
Yeah,
the time and developing. So whilst one team might work in a particular way at the moment, and it's nice to be symbiotic, I guess, with that team. Perhaps by the time you're ready to be, they might have moved on as well.
yeah,
I
yeah.
appreciate it. Chinmay, any final thoughts from you?
I think, yeah, when you're thinking cross-functionally, I think getting your it's good that you think it, but get it reviewed from the relevant people, because what is being said and what you perceive and where that thought is coming from may be unknown to you. So get it reviewed. Even if you're thinking cross-functionally, you have implemented those changes, make sure you get reviewed from those people who are involved. That way, uh, you are not going in the right direction, even though you're thinking right, you can easily deviate to somewhere else. So it's always good to be, good to getting it reviewed from whoever is involved. That way, everything is validated and problems are avoided upfront rather than waiting till the end, and then everything is chaotic. And the trust between, you know, individuals within the team, it's broken, or at least it gets impacted when you think this is what was said and they think this is not what I said, and it can only lead to chaos. So get things reviewed, I would say, to as a parting thought.
Yeah, and it's very much that if you're going through the effort of applying that cross-functional thinking and actually trying to put some cross-functional practice into place as well, share it, create the big picture, give people the opportunity to see how you brought things together, what could impact or influence their decisions or their viewpoint as well. Yeah, I really like those points. I think, gents, it's probably a good point probably to close it down. I don't have anything further to add myself in terms of what you've both just mentioned, and indeed what we've been talking about over the last 45 minutes or so. What I would like to add is thank you both for your time and your interest and insight. I think we mentioned your book earlier on, Roger. I know you've been kind enough to share with us a discount code, so I'll put that in the description so anyone can take advantage of that. I definitely recommend it. I have a copy myself, as you've seen. But more widely, just look forward to seeing and hearing from you both, Chinmay and Roger, in the wider BA community and change community over time. All right. So thanks again.
Thank you.